Are you ready, Carrie?
Ready, sorry.
'Cause I think Hannah had already hit the record button.
Now
So-
I'm ready.
Okay, reset. Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Josh.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
You're good, because
Yeah.
we had good news today.
You gave me good news. Now I'm real good.
Yeah. It's fun when we resolve conflict
Yes.
peacefully and productively, where all parties win. We should do one on that.
We should.
We did do a healthy conflict one, but we should do one
We
about.
talked about a win-win on that one. I think we used that phrase, though.
Yeah, we did. We
Yeah.
did do that.
Mhm.
Yeah. That is the most ideal situation, is where it's hard too, because when you let me finish my sentence. Had that moment where I finished it in my head, but not to you guys, where all parties win. But it's hard because you have to really put aside hurt feelings, or like if your injustice bone was triggered,
Sure.
which usually is what happens with me. Like, how dare they? So. But I do think in a situation all parties will win.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Good.
There's nothing terrible, people, but I don't think we should
No one
disclose
cares.
exactly
And no one
what
cares
it
that
was.
much.
Just business stuff.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, to kind of clue everybody in on this episode, we'll kind of jump right in here and let you guys know what we're going to talk about today. We are talking about the phenomenon of granting second chances. So don't go anywhere. Welcome, everybody, to Therapist Take podcast. We are now, I think, somewhere around episode 17, 18, something like that, which is good. And in this one, we are talking about second chances and granting second chances. And so I'm just going to briefly go over the three main questions or points, or whatever you want to call them, that we're going to cover in this one. The first, which I have in my little paper here because I always forget. The first one is why are second chances hard for others or hard for some and easy for others. We're going to talk about if you think of second chances and the ability to give them as on a continuum. We're going to talk about the extremes, which we're calling like the cheap forgiver, which isn't our term. We'll talk about that later. And the hardliners. And then the last thing we're going to do is just offer some of our tips to help you determine second chances from like a healthy middle, whether
balance.
to give, whether to give or to not give. That's more thought out and not necessarily reactive to any particular thing. So that's what we're going to do today. Easy breezy. And at the end of it, we will have solved the problem of second chances.
I mean, it's just like every podcast. We're just taking problems and
it's kind of fitting, too. Do you know why?
Why?
I just learned that one of our favorite podcasters is kind of getting some heat right now.
Oh.
Andrew Huberman.
Oh.
Yeah, I just learned this. And I did go and check some things out. I don't know exactly, what. I haven't done that much research to try to figure out exactly what's going on, and I don't think he exactly has made a statement, but it all has to do with stuff in his personal life and love life and things that we tend to get really interested in, and the people we prop up as better than us. He was supposed to be
aspiring to.
And so we'll see how that pans out, and people have to determine whether or not they get a second, or he gets a second chance. So speaking of which, like when it comes to celebrities, where do you fall on that? Like, you more apt to give a second chance, or are you like, once they kind of cross just move on now?
I don't know that I care that much about famous people that don't impact me. But I do think culturally, I've been saying for a couple of years that I'm really glad that it feels like in the grand kind of social sphere that we're holding more people to account.
Yeah.
And we're telling more truth. But I think the next step is to also make room for forgiveness and reconciliation.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we're there. So I don't have a personal oh, I wish I liked that person and give them a second chance. I just think in general, we need to be able to be humans everywhere we go.
Right.
And so you're going to make a mistake. And I wish culturally that we could, normalize, institutionalize in a sense, second chances, and not in the way that was about other people having advantages and other people having disadvantages. Right.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And so we'll kind of flip the question a little bit differently then, because
so you'll get the answer you want. Yeah.
Well, no, I was like, it's true. It's like, I'm kind of, in a way, I'm kind of the same way. But when it comes to celebrities, but we'll make it a little more personal in that we tend, I think you and I both are pretty balanced in terms of like, we've had lots of personal conversations on certain things, and I think I know the answer is going to come here from the question. And so, like, I think you and I both have a pretty healthy approach on knowing when to, when it comes to, like, hey, I need to talk to somebody about this or that because I got a decision to make.
Sure.
What side do you lean? Like where do you feel your body kind of naturally leaning you toward, like the side of like to put distance or to move toward, like when you feel that, some hint of violation?
Oh, distance.
Yeah, I knew that was
You
coming.
knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know mine, right?
Toward,
right?
Yeah.
And I think, and so like, in fact, we're going to talk here in a minute about cheap forgivers, and I would even say at one point in time in my life, that's exactly what I was a cheap forgiver, very quick to forgive, and to my own detriment at times, right? And was there a time in your life that you were quick to distance to your detriment? Well, you're
Have I stopped?
Like, Carrie's like, wait,
is that an issue?
Does the distancer ever have detriment there? Like, seems like it
Distancers
worked out for me.
Yeah, distancers love their distance. What's wrong with that, right?
And the pursuers are going, huh?
Yeah, I know. I'm exhausted.
This was so much work.
No,
and
absolutely.
then you still ran.
Absolutely, distancing has worked against me. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's self-preservation to where, we've talked before about, look, no one's bothering me. I'm all alone. Oh, I'm all alone.
Did you get a little nervous when I said, we want to make this personal?
Yeah. I'm a distancer. I'm thinking, what amount of personal?
I'm going, if there was a thought bubble above your head, it would be
been
like, I am going to murder you right now.
I'm not against telling you
This is
stop.
This is the guys. If she's not back on after this, no, it was because of that.
I'm going to have the flu every Friday for.
That's
No, I would never lie about it. I would just be like, no.
Yeah, so that's why I did the celebrity route, because I was like
softer.
Yeah, like but then you're like, well, I don't think I really care. I was like, well, how can I ask?
How can I get to what I'm really trying to ask? Yeah, and I know that you're the go towards. I think we've had many a meeting where I say, Josh, that's enough.
Yeah.
Quit doing. And you've had many a meeting where you're like, Carrie, you got to do whatever it is, right?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Very, very. You've become a very prominent voice of reason, and just so people know, like, it's not easy going to Carrie and saying, hey, what do you think I should do? Because you will often point out, like, have I thought about something that I don't want to think about?
You do the same to me. When I come to you, I know you're going to tell me, and I often know.
But that's probably why we do it.
It's probably why we do it.
Yeah.
Gluttons for punishment? No.
Or maybe we just want to get it resolved.
Yeah, maybe.
Hear the hard truth.
The hard truth.
Yeah. So anyways, but anybody listening to this, watching us live right now or watching the rebroadcast. Oh, I forgot to give my disclaimer, guys. Please go give us a 5-star review if you're listening to this on the podcast. Stop what you're doing right now in this moment. It takes like 2 seconds. It really helps with algorithms. And of course, if you're watching us and you haven't subscribed, please do that and ring the bell. It's a really quick and easy way to support the work we're doing here, because we also do other videos, and we just posted one on gaslighting and doing a series on gaslighting. We have the other podcast, Are You in Session with Mary and Josie, which is really good. They don't post do as many recordings, but they are really fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so back to the topic at hand. Let's talk about then, kind of just get right into this first question of why we talked about like that you tend to lean toward distancing. I tend to lead toward the pursuits, and so why do you think it's hard for for some and easy for others when it comes to, giving a second chance?
Well, I think we have 3 bullet points, but my immediate answer is usually something related to trauma or a difficult life experience, right?
Yeah.
Where you learned, pursuing or distancing or some version of that was a safe or unsafe outcome, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that trauma is called trauma because it overwhelms the system, right? And it timestamps and it expands and it kind of slices things into this was adaptable, this kept me okay, or this didn't, right? And so I do think that imprinting of that is going to influence kind of whether you're someone who, forgives easily or someone who is going to take a harder line, and somewhere in that continuum.
Right. Yeah. It's basically the nature versus nurture.
Sure.
And usually it's a combination of that would make that determination. So I think, the second bullet point, so you mentioned you're basically mentioning the nature bullet point. I'm sorry, you're mentioning the nurture.
Right. Experience.
Yeah, experiences. Yeah. Right. And so, but the nature version or part of it would be how we're wired.
Yes.
Right?
So, and that's a big part too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, some people are wired to want to move toward, and some people are wired to be, to kind of manage their feelings in those types of situations from a distance. And that's not even, a whole nother conversation is how epigenetics work and how we pass trauma down from generation to generation, which is fascinating to me.
Oh, I know. Me too.
I would love to do a podcast episode on that. I just feel like we need a guest.
I was going to say, we need an identified expert because there's so much about that I love to continue to learn, but I don't think I could speak intelligently enough about it.
I agree that I wouldn't be able to speak intelligently about it. But I think the other thing too, for people to consider on like why it might appear easier for some and hard for others, is that it's just situational.
I agree. It's situational also.
Not all second chance situations are created equal.
A second chance at work versus a second chance in your romantic relationship, that's apples and oranges for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But that, like, there are our partners, for example, can hurt us so badly in such a way that we might have to draw a hard line, and where we wouldn't do that with work relationships, because a work relationship isn't positioned to hurt us to that degree, right? So what that also means, though, is that we might be more apt to give more chances to our partner, because of the depths of intimacy that can be reached in committed couple relationships versus the level of intimacy that's reached in work relationships. So it's definitely situational for sure. On top of that, and by the way, I wanted to say this too, that I only give 1 second chance, and that's it. After that, it's a third chance. Then there's a fourth chance.
Oh, bad dad joke. Bad dad joke.
That's not bad. That's a good one.
That's bad. I like bad dad jokes, but that one.
Well, that's what makes them good, right?
Usually
a bad dad joke is a good dad joke.
I know.
If it's,
I'm just saying,
the funnier it is, it's just supposed to be awkward.
That's not my favorite. How's that? That one right there.
It's not?
No, that dad joke was not my favorite.
What's your favorite?
I don't know right now off the top of my head. I'm distancing here. Josh.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I got you. That's it. Carrie, Carrie coming out with a dad joke.
I know. Okay. I will. I'll find one.
Yeah, that was one.
I know it was.
I'm confused. So, but let's move into talking about the extremes. Cheap forgivers versus hardliners. And so, as I said, at one point in time, I felt like I was a cheap forgiver, very quick to just push aside any pain or violation and just you know, do the cliche statement that says, you know, it's like, it's fine, it's okay, you know, whatever, you know, no harm, no foul, or something like that.
Yeah.
And that term comes actually from is it Janice Abraham or Janice Abrams
I think
Spring?
it's Abrams, isn't it?
Abrams, I believe. Janice Abrams Spring. If you want to look her up, we'll put a link to her into her book that she wrote on forgiveness.
Okay.
She's primarily known for After the Affair book.
Right.
It's one of her most famous books, or most popular book. But she also wrote one on forgiveness, where it's probably one of my favorite concepts that came out of that book is the idea of a cheap forgiver. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that was totally me at one point in time. I just didn't have a name for it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's your understanding of a cheap forgiver then?
Well, I think that often it's driven actually by avoidance. You know, someone that says, sure, it's fine, I just want it over.
Right.
Right. I hear that. That's the language I hear a lot. Mm-hmm. Of like, well, I just wanted the fight to end. I just wanted to move on. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to put it behind me. Right. And I think it's, you know, conflict avoidance. I think it's about feeling minimization. I think it's not even, I think it's words, and I don't even know that it's actual process. Right. So thinking back to that podcast where we talked about the 3 channels of self-awareness, mm-hmm. You're not really checking with your body. You're not really processing your emotions. You may not even be reflecting in that, you know, checking what are your quality thoughts. You're just almost reflexive.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think about why this phenomenon might happen, I mean, what makes sense to me, and I'm not saying it is exactly or always this way, but it seems to me that someone who's a cheap forgiver would have to really couch self-preservation in the context of community, you know?
Yeah.
So in other words, like that, this community or the, you know, and you have to think of like every relationship or sub-relationship as a little small community, you know? So these little small subgroups, you know, and, I can only survive, I can only make it or only live well within these, you know, within this particular group. And so I don't want to speak out against the group because that would then be bad for me.
Sure.
Right. So it's like I think a cheap forgiver doesn't really understand, you know, self-care or self-preservation outside of that context, mm-hmm. that I can actually stand up for myself to potential detriment of the group and still know, I mean, of me being a part of the group and still know that I will be okay because I belong somewhere. Mm-hmm. You know, I can figure out where to belong if this group rejects me for doing that.
Right.
There's another group somewhere that will accept me in this way of doing things.
And you can hear, as you say that, you can hear what a big task that is. What a big risk
huge.
That can be, to risk the out group to preserve self, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's major risks, and I mean, because what if that group is your marriage?
Right.
What if that group is, you know, your extended family? Mm-hmm. You know, and so for anybody who's ever changed faiths or political parties, you know, that have and their families found out, you know, have probably, you know, not everybody. I'm sure there have been some families that have adapted well to that, but there are definitely some that will have nothing to do with them. Over something like that. You know, so so there's not. I mean, if you're really identifying somebody, if you're listening to this and you're identifying with being a cheap forgiver, if there's anybody you need to be cheaply forgiving is yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's not like you're doing it for no apparent reason or that you're weak-minded or something. It's that the way your brain is understanding self-preservation and survival is couched in the context of these groups.
Yes.
And the last thing you want to do is, you know, upset the system.
Sure. And you know, even to just acknowledge it may be the safer choice. To say, sure, for a temporary space or whatever, right? I mean, and even if you had to do that before, it doesn't mean that you have to do it now. Right. Right. And so it's a moving target, right? And again, the idea of forgiving yourself, even, right? For, I can't believe that I used to be a cheap forgiver.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe you needed to.
Oh yeah. Like I do. You're right. Like it's definitely one of those things where I look back and I'm like, why didn't I do this sooner? Like why didn't I? I mean, it seems like a much better way to find a balance, than to be a cheap forgiver, and I'm sure everybody's had those moments in life where they're like, why didn't I do this sooner?
Right.
But I think you also got to go back and forget about hindsight, kind of get back in that moment and realize that, for whatever reason, it makes more sense now to not do that.
Yes.
But back then it didn't.
Sure.
It did make sense.
Sure. Well,
So
now we got to talk about the other extreme, right? The hardliners.
Yeah.
Right. So when you think of that, I mean, just even that descriptor.
I don't like hardliners.
Right. Hardliners.
Cheap forgivers don't like hardliners. Like what?
Yeah.
The hardliners are. I will say that I don't have like if I were to meet somebody and realize like we're getting along and there's a potential friendship there, and this has actually happened before, and they somehow or another indicate to me that they're a hardliner. I don't usually have much interest because I need to be in a relationship. Like if I'm going to build a friendship, because friendships are hard work. I mean, committed couple relationships are definitely a lot of hard work, but friendships are also hard and they take time. You have to for them to grow and develop. You have to pay attention to them, and I don't want to be in a friendship where I feel like if I mess up one time, that I'm just out. It's just over. You know, like I need some leeway to piss you off and know that we'll try to figure it out. You know.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're therapists, so we really like living in the middle.
Yeah.
Anyways, right. But
I'm more like I was a cheap forgiver for so long.
Right.
Dang it.
Right.
Like you can't forgive me this one time.
Right.
But no, I think in that healthy middle though is what we're going for.
So what do you think? I mean, just like we kind of really, I think, offered a compassionate perspective for the cheap forgiver, end of the continuum. We need to tap into the compassion for the hardliners on the other end of it, right?
I agree. Yeah.
And I think that obviously that's a survival mechanism as well, right? That's perhaps the people that you were supposed to count on were not worthy, right? Or that they, especially early in your life, they weren't there, they weren't available, they weren't capable, they hurt you. And counting on yourself has been the only way that you stay safe. Right. Be dodgy, be shifty, be able to move. If people are, messing it up, get out of there, right? Cut bait and run quick. Right. And that reinforces this hardline approach. Like, look at me, look how good I am at taking care of me.
Yes. Like from a, compassionate point of view, is it possible that the hardliner in your life has just endured their share of pain and suffering and betrayal and injustice, that sometimes they just feel like they just don't have any more room for nonsense. Right. What they pursue. And sometimes their sense of nonsense is maybe a little more sensitive to the touch than because of those things. But I think there's I don't think it there's a point where it's not healthy. It's just like with a cheap forgiver. In fact, I would say if you identify as being a hardliner, that's an extreme. A cheap forgiver is an extreme, and I would say from my perspective that those living in those spaces probably aren't going to. It's probably not going to work out for you very well. Right. Especially maybe for a period of time. Especially
to have relationships.
You're exactly right. Exactly. So there's, we can, and I'm glad you said that too, because we can all work harder at being more compassionate for people in those situations. Now, it doesn't mean that showing compassion does not mean that that it's okay to be treated like a doormat or a punching bag or pin cushion.
Sure. There are some people, it's just better, they're too hardliners and it's taking on too much toxicity, to engage. That's not what we're talking about, but trying to understand how people arrive at these spaces, right? Either the 1 or the 10 on this continuum.
Now that we're talking about it, do you think we Do you think hardliners and cheap forgivers get together? Now that I haven't even spent time thinking about that.
I don't know. Yeah,
I think sometimes,
maybe.
like thinking back on it.
Well, someone has to be someone, even if someone's a 9 and someone's a 10, there's still got to be that 1 degree of difference, right? Because you can't have 2 10 hard liners.
I definitely know that we've worked with both, but we definitely, I think, more so just thinking on it because in doing betrayal trauma work, we have definitely worked with a lot of cheap forgivers. And that's not to say that people who have been betrayed that go in for therapy are cheap forgivers.
No.
I actually think that they're working very hard to try to figure out how
not
to forgive.
do it cheaply.
Right?
Yeah. That's the whole point.
So they're probably working harder to not be a hard liner.
Yeah.
In some sense. But,
yeah.
So it's something I hadn't really thought about before today. But
I'll keep chewing on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's. So we're going for this healthy middle thing. So let's talk about just tips we have, and just for just another disclaimer here for the listening audience or the viewing audience that we don't we prepare as much as putting together, like knowing what our topic is. We'll do a little bullet point thing so we know, so we can just stay on task. But when it comes to things like when I said, hey, well, the third point, we're going to talk about tips for doing this. We haven't talked about these yet with each other, so and that's just so we can keep the discussion more organic and let you see our process of doing this. So, so off the top of my head, though, when I'm talking about like, okay, so how can someone, what does someone need to do to feel like that they're kind of in that healthy middle? And like, I need to make a decision about, do I want to go ahead and work toward forgiveness, or do I just need to draw a hard line? And I think the first thing, at least from on my end, is thinking about is like, I think they really have to first kind of do some introspective work and determine, does the violation warrant forgiveness? Because sometimes I think we throw around the word forgiveness so much that it really it loses its meaning sometimes. And that, I'm not saying all, but I would say most people aren't in situations where they're having to forgive multiple times. Because when the violation is of such where you find that you are needing to forgive somebody, or you're faced with forgiving somebody, that's a big deal.
It is.
And I think so many times people are like, hey man, would you, I forgot to return that thing you loaned me. I hope you can forgive me. I'm like, no problem, man. Already forgiven, but there's really no forgiveness there because there's not really a violation that warrants a forgiveness. I might be irritated with them, like, man, it's the last time I'm going to loan something to John, because he never returns it, but doesn't mean I haven't forgiven him. Just means I would like to have my stuff when I want it.
Yeah.
So I think that would be the first thing, is to really determine, like, what is the violation, and has it reached or crossed a line into, like, you have really hurt me, and now this warrants forgiveness, first of all. What are you thinking?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think that we do throw around the word forgiveness. Right. Oh my gosh, I'm late. Please forgive me, whatever. Right. And I do think that I think what you're asking when you say introspection is, again, back to that, like, self-reflection of, like, okay, so what is the violation? Where do I feel it? What does it say about me, about us? And actually taking some stock in that. Right. And I think that's obviously going to slow the process down to avoid hitting at those extremes of that continuum too, right? Versus, oh, it's fine, to, oh, I'll never talk to you again. Wait, hold on. What's really going on? Where does it hurt? What does this actually mean?
Yeah, right. I can keep going, but I want to share the spotlight here a little bit. So what's the first tip that came to your mind when?
Yeah, I think some of it too is kind of to piggyback off of what you said about where's the violation. And I think you should probably have some general idea of what your non-negotiable boundaries are in
Right.
general.
I thought you might say that. Yeah.
Like, oh no, I don't do relationships and where this takes place. Like that's something like that.
Right.
And usually those non-negotiables are pretty big or even often pretty extreme.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
hang around people that emotionally, physically assault me. Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a pretty non-negotiable.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
And I think that can be almost in a sense like just one level that you're like,
Right.
wait, that wasn't that. Okay, so then what is the violation?
So real quickly, because this would actually probably be a good topic for another podcast, but could you just real quickly help everybody understand, like, when you say non-negotiable, like that there are different types of boundaries?
Yes, there are different types of boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you're right, that probably is several podcasts actually.
Yeah, probably.
But the idea that boundaries aren't just one thing, right? Boundaries
Right.
are complex and they should reflect the complexity probably of the relationship system as well. So some examples are non-negotiable boundaries, right? Just things you are not going to live with. You're not going to be okay with them today or tomorrow or maybe yesterday. But then there's emotional boundaries, right? There's physical boundaries. There's sexual boundaries. There's financial boundaries, social boundaries. And I think that you can break these down into a million different things. But examples of things like, when I say don't touch me, I mean don't touch me, right? My words matter, right?
Right.
Those kind of things, right? Emotional boundaries of, when I'm having a hard time, that you'll be supportive, right? Whatever. They can be positive boundaries, like that second one was a positive, like clear of what you need someone to do. And they can also be negative of don't do this, right? And those are different. And I think I do so much boundary work that I'll often talk to clients because they're here because of boundaries were violated. And so let's organize your boundaries, let's clarify them, and let's also very much identify how those boundaries reflect what you need right now, because boundaries are fluid. They are moving and changing. Non-negotiables, those are the ones that are probably more pretty still, right?
Yeah.
Solid.
And I think for that reason, non-negotiable boundaries, when it comes to out of all the boundary categories, non-negotiable boundaries are the most difficult to face because for the person who's setting them.
Yes.
Because the consequences usually are a lot steeper.
Right.
If they are violated, because we know that the boundaries really only work well if the beholder of those boundaries is willing to follow through with the consequences for violation, right?
Right.
So, if there's an emotional boundary that's crossed or a social boundary that's crossed or all the other ones, like the non-negotiables, when those are crossed, like the consequences just typically are greater and
significant.
Right. They're much more significant and the risk of loss is kind of much more in your face.
It's embedded in probably that boundary. Yeah.
So that was kind of a, little synopsis there. We should do a podcast, episode on that. But yeah, I think determining, what type of boundary was crossed here. And usually it's probably, if it's warranting forgiveness, it's probably non-negotiable, is my guess.
Or close to it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that a sexual boundary that gets crossed wouldn't warrant this, but if it does, it's probably a sexual bound. It's probably both a sexual boundary and a non-negotiable. Like you can't. It is not okay for you to cross this line in a very big way. It's one thing. It's like, that I don't want my butt slapped when you walk by me, because even though we're married, I'm still the owner of my body. To marital rape, which can happen where I am saying no and you're still doing it, So that I would say that would be a non-negotiable.
That's pretty non-negotiable.
Right. So let me throw out another one real quickly. In making this determination of finding that healthy middle. A lot of times when you're faced with a crisis, and I would say a forgiveness situation is at least, at minimum, a miniature crisis, and a lot of times we feel like we have one or two options. So we hear like in couple relationships, do I stay or do I leave? Is an
Right.
example of that. Those are my options. And I think do I forgive or not forgive? Do I forgive or cut ties? And I think like when you find yourself faced with those two options, that can be a red flag for you to take a step back and go, there's got to be, I might not be able to see it yet, but there's got to be a third option, a fourth option or something. And you might need to have someone like me or Carrie like help you with that. But one way you can kind of make that determination is saying, all right, so like, let's just say that, for example, you're feeling like you just need to cut ties. Take a step back and ask yourself, is there anything that could be done that, even though whether you feel like it's possible or probable or not, is there anything that you think could be done that might make you reconsider?
Yeah.
And if your answer is no, then you would go down the why. Like, is it because you don't want to feel foolish? You don't want to feel duped? You just feel that unsafe? Or this is the fourth time this has happened? I mean, what is it?
Right.
And then it's being, learning to be okay with your decision. And I think that is where it gets really hard for people that are like consciously and not a knee-jerk reaction, deciding that there's no more chances now. That was it. Or deciding I'm going to give another chance. When they take a step back and they have that pause, and then they just want to gravitate toward the path of least resistance, and usually that's where like you and I come in and we help them work through the decision to do something where every fiber of their being is pulling them the other way.
Right. I know. It's scary. I can feel it in my body even as you talk about it like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel it for them too. Like a lot of people don't realize that. We should, one of our interns that we have here, an undergraduate intern, she did her interview with me the other day. That was something that we do here with our interns, and she asked some really good questions. And I was like, it'd be really interesting to do a podcast, just an episode to let people know like what it's like for us being on this side of it. Because like, for example, when we're working with people on making or going against the grain or not taking the path least to resistance, like when it comes to forgiveness versus cutting ties, I'm nervous, like I could feel the energy, and I can feel the sense of uncertainty, and I don't know how this is going to work. I mean, when they're doing something new, I'm here to help facilitate it and walk them through it and try to help them see the path, just, see the forest despite the trees, right? But do we know a relationship's going to work out if someone gives a second chance, or do we know someone's not going to end up, wondering, let's say it that way, wondering if they should have given that second chance?
I know.
I mean, no, we don't know that.
We don't.
I think what you and I both have confidence is that even if you do wonder, which would be fairly normal to wonder what would have happened if I had taken another path. I think you and I have confidence that people can still learn to be quite happy or satisfied with the path they chose.
I agree. Yeah, we have to.
Because it's never straight anyways. It's windy and
surprising.
Right. Well, we made it through.
We did.
Is there anything, Hannah, did anything come up in your mind that we should have covered there, or questions, or I want to make sure that we covered all angles so that all problems are resolved in the world.
Well, I'll just say one thing, kind of in wrapping up, not to cut Hannah off, although I'm sure she's heartbroken.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember where I heard this, and I've been trying to think about it as I've been sitting here, but I think a big part of being in a family is teaching people to expect disappointment and to know how to deal with it. And that's similar to second chances, right?
Yeah.
Because, you give people more than a few interactions and probably
Mm-hmm.
people are going to let you down or fall short or something. And
Yeah.
it's not about that you accept less or you're not worth it, right? I mean, those are concepts that are very important too. But yeah, I mean, you're probably going to need
Right.
to give, and you, on the other side, are probably going to need to ask for second chances.
Right. Yeah. It takes me back to that Glennon Doyle quote of like, it's part of this journey is really learning to not disappoint yourself, which means that you're just going to disappoint people sometimes,
Yeah.
which means people are going to disappoint us.
Right.
And it's learning to, create some level of flexibility,
Yes.
there, and like, I think you need a line, otherwise you're a cheap
Yes.
forgiver.
Right. Right.
But to recognize just how human we all are,
Yeah.
on
Sure.
things. And there was one more thing that I was going to say about forgiveness, but it slipped my mind. But I'm sure it'll come up in
Well, I hope
another
you forgive yourself
episode.
for that.
Yeah, at some point. I remember now. Is that forgiveness is when we're talking about throwing it around, real loosely. Most of the time, like when it comes to apology and forgiveness are two different things,
Absolutely.
right?
Sure.
So we do find ourselves in situations where we need to apologize a
Yes.
lot,
Yes.
but people will go down this road of saying like, well, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. It's like, because probably the reality is, unless you have violated some strong moral thing, like if it's been infidelity or you've been lying, cheating, stealing type thing, then you probably didn't do anything wrong. You're apologizing for how somebody else experienced you.
Right. Right.
Now, you don't say it that way. It's like, I'm sorry you experienced me that way. I
You
mean,
can
that's
try. It
probably
won't
not
go
going to go
well.
over very
Yeah.
well. You just say, I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah.
I did, it does bother me that is the experience you had with
Yes.
me.
Sure.
And, I know that goes without saying that it wasn't my intention, but I do think that's an important statement to make because it does acknowledge your own humanity.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
it's a connector statement.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's just the last thing I want to say is just remembering that if you have to make that apology and you're like, I didn't do anything wrong. Like, put that aside for a second and just realize that for whatever reason, the person across from you just experienced you differently than what you intended.
Yeah.
And that's all they have to go off of, really.
Sure.
Is their
We can acknowledge that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So that was free. That was added.
Nice.
Yeah, I like that.
The organic part makes it work.
I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah.
Good.
It's my favorite part of the week. This
Good.
little moment where we solve all the problems of the world.
I know. We can go to bed and
Nothing
feel
bad is
rested.
happening in here right now.
Not right now. And if
Everything's-
it's okay right now, then it's going to
How
be
about
okay.
that? Yeah, I love it. Yeah. All right. Well, we appreciate everybody tuning in. Please, again, make sure you check out the show notes. Check out the series that we're doing on our YouTube channel on the 12 types of gaslighting. It's